The rain began before the nurses wheeled me out of the hospital, a thin curtain of silver whispering across the parking lot. I had been cleared to leave that morning. They gave me a folder of instructions, a prescription, and a gentle smile that said, "You have someone waiting, right?" I nodded because it was easier than explaining silence. The taxi driver was young, polite, restless. He opened the door for me and asked where to. I gave him the address automatically. 43 Marlowe Lane. My tongue knew it even if my heart didn't. He said it was a nice neighborhood. I looked out the window. The world was gray and blurred like a half-washed painting. The 4 bruise on my wrist pulsed with the rhythm of the wipers. When the car turned into my street, my breath caught. The house looked unchanged. Same white porch, same bay window, same climbing ivy that used to tangle around the gutter like stubborn memory. Yet something in the air was wrong, like a song played half a note off key. The porch light was on, warm and golden. Behind the curtains, shadows moved. I paid the driver and stepped into the rain. My coat stuck to my back. The smell of wet earth and distant pine wrapped around me. I reached the front steps, every board familiar beneath my feet. I took out my key. It was heavy old brass, the one Thomas had engraved for me 30 years ago with a single letter K. The lock resisted. I tried again. The key slipped. My hands shook from the chill, from the disbelief. It didn't fit anymore. The sound of laughter came from inside. I froze. It wasn't the sound of children or guests. It was a laugh I knew, sharp, clipped, condescending. "Emma, my daughter-in-law." I knocked softly. The laughter stopped. Then a voice floated through the door, half amused. "She's back." Another voice followed, lower, "My son's. Just leave it." I knocked again, harder. "Luke." Footsteps approached. I could picture him on the other side. Hand hovering near the handle, torn for half a second between decency and indifference. Then his words, flat as concrete. "Mom, you shouldn't be here. You're supposed to rest at the hospital." I was discharged. The doctor said I could go home. A pause. Then a sigh. "It's not your home anymore." The porch light flicked off. Darkness pressed in, thick and deliberate. I stood there, soaked through, the sound of the rain swallowing everything. I wanted to speak, to demand an explanation, but my throat betrayed me. When I finally stepped back, my foot brushed against the welcome mat. Home is where the heart is. Emma had bought it last Christmas. I left it there. I don't remember walking away. Only the sensation of distance growing behind me. The road was slick, reflecting the yellow street lamps like shallow puddles of memory. My chest burned with each breath, the incision tugging under the bandage. A car passed without slowing. I didn't wave. By the time I reached the end of the block, I was shivering. The rain had turned into a fine mist that crept under my collar and found my skin. I stopped beside the mailbox, the one Thomas built from cedar. Its paint was chipped now, the initials we carved together faded into ghost lines. I had nowhere to go but forward. The only motel near the highway still rented by the night. The walk took me an hour. Each step a negotiation between pain and pride. The sign outside flickered. Hillcrest in vacancy. Inside, the air smelled of detergent and old coffee. The clerk barely looked up from her phone. "Cash or card?" she asked. "Cash," I said. My voice sounded smaller than I expected. She slid a key across the counter. The metal tag stamped with the number 16. End of the hall, second floor. The stairs creaked under my weight. My chest tightened with every step. When I unlocked the door, a burst of cold air greeted me. The room was square and anonymous. One bed, one lamp, one television that hummed quietly even when unplugged. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the peeling wallpaper. For a long time I did nothing. The pain in my ribs pulsed like a heartbeat I didn't trust anymore. The clock on the nightstand blinked 8:42 p.m. I had been awake since dawn, yet sleep felt like a luxury meant for other people. On the small table near the window sat a notepad meant for guests. I tore off the first sheet and wrote the date. Below it I wrote a single sentence. "Today I discovered the house forgot me." The words looked fragile in my handwriting, as if they could crumble if I stared too long. I folded the paper, slipped it under the lamp. When I finally removed my coat, the scent of antiseptic rose with the damp. I pressed a hand to my chest where the stitches lay hidden beneath the gauze. They were neat, almost elegant, as if someone had tried to repair what was beyond repair. The window rattled with wind. Outside, the world blurred into a smear of gray and silver. I could see the outline of pine trees bending under the weather. Thomas had loved days like this, when the world was quiet enough for thought. He used to say rain made honesty easier. I wished I could tell him he was right. I lay back without taking off my shoes and listened to the heater struggle. The sound reminded me of a breath that did not want to be taken. I closed my eyes and tried to count each inhale, each careful lift against the tight bandage. 4 in, 6 out, as the nurse had taught me. The rhythm steadied, but it did not soothe. Every time my lungs filled, a memory rose with the air. There was a bench in the old shop, the one Thomas built from maple. My hands lived at that bench. I sanded curves until they shone like river stones. Customers used to run their palms along the tops of tables I made and smile without words. Craft is a conversation that does not need a voice. I thought I would die at that bench someday far away, with sawdust in the folds of my sleeves and something honest cooling beside me. Instead, I was here, in a room that smelled like the end of a long bus ride, listening to the wind push against a window that did not fit its frame. I sat up and turned on the lamp. The light was too bright for the hour, its shade a cheap imitation of warmth. I took the folder from the hospital bag and spread prescriptions across the bedspread. The pill names looked like mistranslations of weather. I swallowed 2 with faucet water that tasted like tin. Then I reached for my purse and pulled out the small hard case that had lived there for months, tucked beneath receipts and loose buttons. Inside was a thin card the size of a postage stamp. On it, a date in my handwriting. The last day before I moved in with Luke and Emma. I had walked through the house and placed a tiny camera in a corner of the hallway bookshelf. I told myself it was for safety in case of falls or accidents. The truth was simpler. I wanted to remember what the house looked like when my name still belonged to it. I held the card up to the light. It caught a crescent of lamp glow. Something inside me steadied. Not joy. Not even hope. A shape like purpose. The laptop was old and took its time to wake, the fan whirring as if it had opinions. I fed the card into a reader and waited. Folders rolled into place. Dates lined up like a ledger. I clicked one almost at random. The screen showed my hallway in clean black and white. The image was grainy but faithful. The frame held the edge of my bedroom door and the first 3 stairs. I could almost smell the cedar polish. I fast-forwarded. Empty rooms. Afternoon light. Then motion. A shoulder passing. A hand. Voices from deeper in the house. I turned the volume up and leaned forward. The stitches mentioned their existence again. I ignored them. It was Halloween. Emma's laugh came first, bright and crisp. A crowd answered. Someone said this is going to be grand. Then Emma stepped into view. She wore one of my old cardigans and had sprinkled powder into her hair. She crooked her back and pressed a hand to her chest. "Luke, where are my pills?" she wheezed in a voice that pretended to tremble. "The ones for the heart I forgot I had." Laughter rolled in. Luke appeared behind her with his phone held up like a small flag. He framed her, angled for better light. He was careful. He was always careful when the focus was on him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced. "Cora Malone, the patron saint of inconvenience." The room broke. Emma coughed into a tissue and then dropped it on the floor. She pretended to miss the trash can and shrugged at the camera with a smile so perfect it could cut. It took me a moment to realize I was not breathing. I pressed my palm flat to my chest and made myself take in air. I watched for another minute because I needed to see all of it. I needed to be done with needing them. From somewhere out of frame a deeper voice murmured, almost patient, almost bored. "Turn that off. She will find out." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. The tone was not fear of hurting me. It was fear of being seen. I paused the video and let the still image study me. Shadows, grain, a cardigan badly worn. I closed the laptop, then opened it, then closed it again. I felt different, but not in the way I expected. There was no thunder. There was no scream pressed into my teeth. Just a steady clarity that ran like cold water through a dirty pipe. I wrote in the motel notepad again. I wrote slowly because I wanted my hand to hear every word. I wrote that I entered my house and found a new lock. I wrote that my son told me to go back to the hospital. I wrote that pretending to be me felt like a game to them. I wrote that someone else in that room knew to fear the truth. I signed my name. Then I underlined it once. The ink bled a little into the cheap paper and became more than one line. That felt appropriate. It was past midnight when the hallway outside my door finally quieted. A truck idled in the parking lot. The heater clicked off and then on again as if arguing with itself. I pulled the blanket over my legs and held the key from the house in my fist. The edges pressed into my skin until I could feel the shape it had taught my palm for 3 decades. I fell asleep that way, clutching what no longer opened anything because that is how people begin again. They hold the useless thing until it stops being a tool and becomes a lesson. When morning came, it came gently. The rain had softened into something like breath. The sky outside the window was the color of paper before a story is written. I sat up slowly, tested the pull of the stitches, and sipped the motel coffee that tasted like it remembered being coffee once. There are days you plan and days that plan you. This day chose me. I dressed in the same clothes because they were all I had and I brushed my hair with my fingers until it made peace with my head. In the mirror I looked older than yesterday, but I also looked undeniable. There is a difference. The first you suffer. The second you earn. I took the folder, the notepad, the video card. I tucked them into my purse with a care that felt ceremonial. Then I placed the house key on the table and looked at it a long time. I thought about leaving it there for the maid to find and throw away. I thought about tossing it into the trash can with a little dramatic flourish that no one would witness but me. I put it back in my pocket instead. Not because I believed it would work again, but because I wanted to decide when it would stop mattering. Outside, the air had that clean smell that follows a hard rain. Puddles stitched the parking lot into fragments of sky. I walked past a man smoking by the ice machine. He nodded as if we shared a club no one wanted to join. I nodded back. I did not go back to the house. I did not go to the hospital. I went to a small coffee shop on Maple and 3rd that still used real ceramic cups and played old records at a volume that let you think. I ordered tea and took a corner table near the outlet. I opened the laptop and created a new folder. I named it The Lock. Inside I saved the video again with the date and time. Then I wrote a list titled Simple Moves. First, rest. I marked it done because I had slept and that counts. Second, call the bank. I wrote the name of the manager who had handled our family accounts for years. A man whose voice carried the weight of brushed steel. If the lock changed, the ledgers might have been touched first. Third, call Iris Caldwell. I wrote her name without hesitation. Iris had been a summer intern at my old shop when she was 19. She asked questions that made me feel listened to. She used to trace the grain patterns with a finger and say would never lies. Last I heard she had finished law school. People who love truth usually find their way into the work that requires it. Fourth, document everything. Dates. Times. Words. Silences. Silences can be evidence when placed beside the right words. I finished my tea and bought a small sandwich for later. On my way out, I caught my reflection in the glass door. I did not look like a woman who wanted a fight. I looked like a woman who knew she was finished losing. The bank opened at 9. I waited on a bench outside under an awning with a mother and a child who was fascinated by a worm on the wet concrete. The child asked the worm where it was going. The worm answered by being a worm. The mother smiled apologetically at me as if the curiosity required a permit. I smiled back to absolve her. When the doors unlocked, I stepped into the cooled air and the faint perfume of paper. The manager was not the one I remembered. He had moved on or retired. A younger man led me to a polished chair and asked how he could help. I asked about my safe deposit box. He checked the screen and nodded, then asked for identification and my key. I had both. He guided me to a small room where he placed the metal drawer in front of me, and then left me alone with a practiced smile. I did not open it yet. I let my hands rest on the cold metal. I wanted to be present for the moment. Then I slid the box open. Inside lay documents neatly stacked, a few items wrapped in cloth, a folded letter with my name on the outside in Thomas's handwriting. I knew the curve of the K, the way he made the tail of the afloat like a small boat. My throat closed for a second. I let it. Then I unfolded the letter. My love, it began, and the room narrowed to that single line. He wrote about the way the world moves when we think it is still. He wrote about people changing without announcing it, about kindness that survives because someone keeps it fed. He wrote about the land and the house and the shop we no longer owned and the things we still did. And then he wrote a sentence I read 3 times before I could place it inside my body. If the day comes when they treat you as a burden, you will not need their permission to be free. Beneath the letter was a document with a tidy seal. It spelled out words that turned my pulse into a drum. There were clauses and provisions and a phrase that seemed to gleam up from the page. Full discretion in the event of neglect or abandonment. I felt something shift in my chest that had nothing to do with stitches. I closed the box gently and rang the bell for the manager. He escorted me back to the lobby where the light looked clearer than it had when I walked in. Outside, the sky was still the color of paper before the story. Only now I could see the outline of the first sentence. I called Iris from the sidewalk. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was older, surer, but warmed by recognition. "Cora," she said, "I hoped you would call me someday. What do you need?" "I need to open a door," I said, "and I would prefer not to knock." "Come to my office at 2, she said. "Bring whatever you have. We will make the rest." I stood there for a moment after the call ended. Cars slid by. A pigeon strutted with the satisfaction of a creature that understands its city. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. The tremor that had lived in them since yesterday was gone. I did not feel brave. I felt accurate. That was better. On the way back to the motel, I passed a hardware store with a display of locks in the window. Silver, brass, black and steel. Some with keys, some with codes. I stared at them with a small smile. The clerk inside glanced at me as if I might be deciding which new prison to buy. I kept walking. Locks are not for keeping people like me out anymore. Not today. Back in the room, I placed the letter on the table and smoothed the creases with my palm. I opened the laptop and created another folder. I named it The Key. I took a photo of the letter for my records. I placed the video file beside it. I wrote a short note describing the morning in simple sentences, so the facts would not blur later. When I finished, I set my phone alarm for noon to remind me to eat, and for 1 to remind me to leave for Iris. I lay down for 20 minutes and watched the light move slowly across the ceiling as if it were measuring me. The heater whispered. The world did not change its mind. It did not need to. I closed my eyes and listened to the new rhythm inside my chest. It did not sound like victory. It sounded like a beginning. I had been locked out. I had no intention of knocking again. The motel room had no smell of morning, only the faint trace of chlorine that rose from the bathroom tap. I turned it on until the water ran clear. Steam drifted across the mirror and blurred the outline of a woman who looked like she was trying to remember her own name. I wiped a circle in the glass. The face that stared back had lines that used to be stories but now looked like roads that no one traveled anymore. I boiled water in the dented kettle beside the television and poured it over a tea bag that tasted mostly of paper. The first sip scalded my tongue. A small punishment for being alive. Outside, the sky carried the color of unfinished porcelain. I watched droplets slide down the window, tracing invisible letters. At 9, I called the pharmacy to confirm my prescription. The voice on the other end said they would deliver to my address. I told them to send it to the motel instead. There was a pause long enough for pity to breathe through the line before the clerk agreed. I gave her the room number and hung up. The silence that followed was almost kind. I used it to start sorting what little I owned. A coat, a pair of shoes, the folder from the hospital, the laptop, a small wooden box that once held my carving tools. The box was empty now, but when I opened it, the scent of cedar still lived there. Thomas had carved it for me on our first anniversary. Inside the lid, under the grain, he had etched 2 words with a chisel too delicate for anyone else to notice. Keep building. I traced them with a fingertip and whispered, "I'm trying." At 10, the pharmacy delivery knocked. A paper bag, a receipt, no eye contact. The young man handed it over and walked away before I could thank him. I closed the door and leaned against it until the footsteps disappeared down the hall. People rush away from the grief of strangers as if it is contagious. The pills sat on the counter beside the cooling cup. I swallowed 2 and opened the curtains wider. The parking lot glittered with leftover rain. A couple argued near their car. Their voices rose and then broke into laughter. I envied the way sound could mend itself that fast. I spent the next hour writing. Not in the notebook this time, but directly on the laptop. The words felt safer behind a password. I wrote down everything since yesterday. The hospital, the lock, the rain, the porch light that went dark, Luke's voice telling me to leave. I wrote it as simply as I could because truth, I have learned, loses strength when dressed in excuses. Then I wrote about the video, about the cardigan and the laugh and the sentence that had stitched itself into my skull. Turn that off. She will find out. Every time I replayed it in my head, I heard the tone more clearly. Not concern but strategy. Someone who already knew what lines were being crossed. Someone with practice. When I finished, I saved the file under a name that meant nothing to anyone but me. Oaklight. The wood I loved most when I carved was oak. Stubborn, honest, unwilling to warp under pressure. If I had to become a kind of material now, that would do. Around noon the clouds opened, and sunlight slid across the carpet in uneven bars. I stepped into it like a test. The warmth startled me. Felt like permission. I pulled the chair closer to the window and sat until my pulse matched the slow movement of light. I told myself that healing might start exactly like that, without a declaration, just the body remembering where softness lives. The television clicked on by itself when the remote slipped from the nightstand. A morning news anchor spoke about a storm moving east, about damage and restoration. The word restoration clung to me. I muted the volume and let her lips keep moving without sound. I looked at the phone on the table. Iris's number was still in my call log from yesterday. At 2 I would see her. The thought made the room feel smaller, as if it had been holding its breath with me. I packed the purse again, the folder, the flash drive, the letter. Before leaving, I turned the notepad to a clean page and wrote 3 lines. If they erased my name from the door, I will carve it somewhere they cannot paint over. Him. I tore the page neatly and slipped it into the cedar box. Maybe someday someone would find it and understand the sound a beginning makes. I locked the door behind me out of habit. The hallway smelled faintly of detergent and lemon, and for a strange moment that scent reminded me of my workshop, the clean afterthought of a long day's work. The stairs groaned, greeting me like an old acquaintance. Outside, the wind had lost its edge. The air felt rinsed. I walked toward the bus stop with my coat open, letting the cold wake whatever parts of me were still asleep. The road shimmered with thin puddles, each reflecting the sky differently, as if none of them agreed on its color. I liked that. Disagreement was proof of life. At the stop, an older woman fed breadcrumbs to a pair of pigeons. She glanced up, smiled without teeth, and said, "They always come back." I wasn't sure if she meant the birds or something larger. "Maybe that's what faith is," I said. She nodded as if the answer had already existed before either of us spoke it. The bus arrived with a sigh of brakes. I climbed on, dropped the coins, and sat by the window. As the town passed in a blur of shops and trees, I caught my reflection again, this time layered over the movement outside. I looked almost whole, like a portrait drawn in pencil but finished in ink. I told myself quietly, "You are going to open the door, Cora, and you will not ask for permission to do it." The bus turned onto Main Street, where the law office waited above the bakery that smelled of cinnamon and persistence. I tightened my grip on the purse. The key from the house still rested inside, its weight a promise. For the first time in months, I was on my way to use a door that might actually open. Iris kept her office above the bakery because she liked the smell. That was what she told me years ago when she was still a student and the dream of law lived mostly in her notebooks. The same smell met me on the stairs, warm and sugar-sweet, carrying a memory of Saturday mornings when Thomas bought pastries just to have a reason to sit beside me with coffee and a slow smile. The door was open. A bell chimed softly when I stepped through. The room was not large, but it was arranged with an attention that made it feel calm. A desk of old oak, a bookshelf that could handle an argument, 2 chairs by the window with a small table between them. On the wall hung a print of trees in winter, their branches bare and elegant like a promise that did not need adornment. Iris stood when she saw me. Her hair was pinned without fuss. Her eyes were the same clear brown as when she was 19 and sanded the edge of a walnut chair until it gleamed like a thought. She crossed the room quickly and took my hands. No questions. No pity. Only presence. "You came," she said. "I did," I answered. "I brought what I have." We sat by the window. She poured tea from a ceramic pot painted with blue dots, and handed me a cup that fit the palm just right. Steam rose into the quiet. Iris waited until I breathed it in, then leaned back and listened while I laid the morning out in order. The motel. The list. The bank. The letter. I showed her the document. She read without speaking, tracing a line once with her finger as if it were a seam that needed testing. When she finished, she placed the paper flat on the table and looked at me the way good doctors do, with attention that does not sting. "This is strong," she said. "Thomas prepared for a storm. You have full discretion under the clause that names neglect or abandonment. We can act." My throat tightened. Relief did not feel like softness. It felt like a frame sliding into place. "What does act mean?" I asked. "It means we collect, we file, and we ask a judge to see what is already visible. You will not need to shout. You will need to be exact." I opened the purse again and set the flash drive on the table. "There is video." She did not flinch. "We will view it together, but only after we log it and make copies. Chain of custody matters more than outrage." I smiled despite myself. "You still talk like every surface is evidence." "Everything is evidence if we know how to hold it," she said. Then a quick grin softened the words. "Old shop habits. You taught me that. A joint that looks clean and a joint that is strong are not always the same thing." We spent the next hour in a rhythm that felt reassuringly mechanical. She scanned the letter and the clause. She photographed the envelope, the seals, the way my name curled in Thomas's hand. She wrote a timeline on a yellow pad while I dictated. Dates. Times. Who said what? When the porch light went off. When I left the hospital. When the lock refused me. She asked me to repeat some details until the telling felt like sanding a rough edge. The surface did not change, but it lay better under the palm. When she asked about witnesses, I hesitated. The nurse who discharged me heard part of the call with Luke. She kept her voice gentle because she thought gentleness could serve where truth might scrape, but she knew what she heard. There is also Eloise. She is a neighbor and a friend. She saw me come back the first time. She knows the house. She can speak to what was usual and what is not. Iris wrote their names and 2 phone numbers. I will contact them today. I will handle it, and I will be careful. Then came the question we had both been circling. "Do you want the house back?" she asked. "Or do you want something else?" I looked out the window at the street where people carried small bags of bread and big bags of weekend. The world down there did not know it had an audience. I want the record to say I was not a ghost living in my own life. I want the door to my name to open when I turn the key. What I do with it after can be decided by the correct version of me, the one who is not being erased. She nodded as if she had been waiting for that answer. "Then we will ask for immediate injunctive relief to protect you from further harm. We will request temporary control of the property under the discretion clause while the case proceeds. We will include the video in the letter. We will ask for a no-contact order if we need to. You will come back here when it is safe to do so. And when the court says who you are, you will decide the next sentence." I held the tea in both hands to steady myself. In the curved surface I could see a small version of my face. I looked like someone being rewritten. "Can they hurt me in the meantime?" I asked. "They can flail," she said. "Flailing is what people do when the story stops serving them. But the law is a room with walls. We will bring you inside it." She printed a few forms for my signature, and then asked if I was ready to view the video. I nodded. She plugged the drive into a small laptop on her desk, closed the blinds just enough to cut glare, and started the file. We watched the hallway in patient gray. When Emma entered wearing my cardigan and my voice like a costume that did not fit, Iris did not react. Her face remained quiet. When Luke announced me like a punchline, Iris paused for a heartbeat and then let it continue. When the deeper voice said the line I could not forget, she leaned forward and turned the volume up. "Again," she said softly and rewound 10 seconds. We listened. The cadence was distinct, a measured baritone that had learned to be obeyed. "Do you recognize that voice?" she asked. I shook my head, then hesitated. It feels familiar in the way a waiting room feels familiar. Authority without affection. She made a note. "We will isolate the audio and enhance the gain. I want to know who was present. I want an exact guest list. I will send a request for security footage from the neighbors in case the porch camera caught arrivals." I had not thought this far. She was already walking into rooms I had not named. A consciousness of relief rose like warmth in my chest. My eyes stung. I blinked it away. Iris closed the laptop and sat back. "There is one more thing," she said. "Your health. Court is a theater of patience. Can stretch a person thin. I want a note from your doctor that states your recent surgery and your need to avoid stress. Not to make you fragile on the record. To make the court hold time properly. Can time be held? I asked. By the right hands, she said. Yes. She walked me through the rest of the plan. Today, file for temporary relief. Tomorrow or the next day, a short hearing. Meanwhile, the letters and the video would be duplicated, one set stored off-site. Notices would be sent to Luke and Emma through proper channels. No calls. No messages. No drifting into old habits of apology. The rule was simple. I would not speak to them directly until a judge sat between our words. When we were finished, she stood and opened the window a little to let the room breathe. The smell of sugar crept in again. Eat something, she said. Keep a notebook of what your body feels. A bruise is a fact. So is a steady hand. Both will be useful. I will try, I said. Do not try, she answered not unkindly. Do. She walked me to the door and then stopped me with a hand on my sleeve. You are not a case, Cora. You are a person. I will treat you accordingly. If you find yourself alone with the worst of it tonight, you can call me. I may not answer at once, but I will return it. That is a promise and not a comfort. I nodded. Promises have shape. I could lean against this one. Down on the street the bakery line had thinned. I bought a small loaf I did not need simply to carry something warm. Outside. I tore a piece and ate it standing by the window where the bakers rolled dough with the stubborn grace of people who know what morning requires. It tasted of butter and patience. The walk back to the bus felt shorter. I watched the storefronts pass and tried to count the doors. Every door belongs to a story about who is allowed inside. I had been told mine. Now I intended to tell it back. At the motel the clerk glanced up when I crossed the lobby. Her eyes lingered a second longer than yesterday. Not curiosity. Recognition. Maybe I looked less like a shadow moving through a borrowed room, and more like a person with a place to be. I took the stairs with care and let myself into 16. The room had warmed in the afternoon light. I placed the bread on the table and set the letter beside it. The words on the page did not change, but they felt closer somehow, as if they were ready to walk. I wrote again. I wrote about Iris and the plan and the way the judge existed for me already as a chair and a gavel and a pair of listening eyes. I wrote about the sentence in Thomas's letter that had become a small engine just below my ribs. Then I wrote one line I had not allowed before. I am not asking for what is mine. I am accepting it. Evening slid across the window. I ate a simple dinner and took the pills on time. When the phone vibrated at 7, I expected Iris. It was Eloise. Her voice sounded like gravel under water. She had heard something from a neighbor and wanted to know if I was safe. I told her I was. She offered a guest room. I declined gently. A motel gives a person a kind of neutrality that a friend's kindness cannot. She understood. Before she hung up she said, "They do not know who they are dealing with." I did not know either, I said. Now I am learning. I turned off the lamp and lay in the near dark. The heater hummed. Cars came and went, their lights brushing the ceiling in slow waves. I placed the cedar box on the nightstand and set the old house key on top of it. It caught a line of light and shone like something almost holy. Tomorrow would bring paper and signatures in corridors. Tonight brought breathing. 4 in. 6 out. The scar pulled and then settled. I placed a hand over it and whispered not to the wound but to the woman who carried it. Keep building. The next morning carried the smell of frost. The motel windows had fogged over from my breath, leaving faint circles like question marks. I wiped one clear and watched a bird pick at crumbs outside the vending machine. The world was moving again and I was still here to notice it. I packed slowly, folding the hospital papers, the tea-stained notebook, the cedar box. Each object made a small sound when it met the purse, as if confirming its duty. At 9 I called Iris. She answered on the first ring. Everything filed, she said. They will be served by noon. Served? I repeated, tasting the word. It sounded both legal and culinary. Something final set on a plate. Stay put today, she said. Do not open your phone to them. I will not, I promised and meant it. I hung up and realized how strange it felt to have someone working for me again. For years I had worked for everyone else, Thomas, Luke, customers, the house itself. I filled silence with usefulness until I became invisible. Now usefulness had shifted shape. I was building a case, not a cabinet. The news played low on the television. A reporter talked about early snow in the north, about power lines down. Behind her the landscape looked like powdered glass. I muted the sound and imagined the cold biting my lungs clean. The thought steadied me. By noon a letter slid under my door. I expected hotel mail, but the envelope was unmarked. Inside was a single sheet from the court clerk confirming receipt of Iris's filing. Seeing my name in that formal print, Cora Malone versus Luke and Emma Malone, made something deep in my ribs unlock. The state of Vermont acknowledged that I existed. That was the quietest kind of miracle. I spent the afternoon walking behind the motel where a narrow path followed a frozen creek. My shoes slipped on leaves, but I kept moving. The air smelled of pine resin and rust. When the wind rose, the trees made a sound like distant applause. Maybe they were applauding the fact that I hadn't gone back. At dusk I returned to the room and turned on the lamp. Its light drew a small circle around me, enough space to work. I opened the laptop in the folder named Oaklight. The file stared back. Screenshots, scanned letters, my typed notes. Evidence. But truth requires witnesses, and memory alone is not a witness until it speaks. I clicked on the video again, only this time I slowed it. Frame by frame the night unfolded. The hallway, the laughter, Emma's posture exaggerated into cruelty. The faint hum of music behind her told me it was not a small gathering. There were others. Faces flickered at the edge of the frame. I captured each pause and saved them as still images. One man with a square watch, another with a scar near his ear. I catalogued them like specimens. Then the moment I had memorized. The deeper voice, calm and practiced. Turn that off. She will find out. I amplified the audio until the background hiss became a wave. Beneath the sentence another sound emerged. A door shutting, faint, metallic. It wasn't a house door. Too heavy. More like an office door or a vault. My pulse quickened. Thomas's warning in his letter echoed back. People change. He had told me to keep the land in my name, not the house. What if Luke had already tried to move the title through that same man who witnessed the party? The suspicion felt like an old skill returning. To carve is to imagine the hidden grain. I printed the screenshots at the front desk using their dusty copier. The clerk didn't ask. When I returned, I pinned them to the motel wall with tape. Faces in gray rows watched me. I sat opposite them and wrote beneath each one. Find name. Find role. Find reason. The heater groaned behind me. I spoke aloud just to hear my voice in the room. You made me a ghost, I told the faces. But ghosts are witnesses too. At midnight, fatigue set in, heavy but clean. I lay on the bed without undressing. Through the window the neon sign blinked, vacancy, vacancy, vacancy. The repetition looked like heartbeat on a monitor. I imagined the word changing one day to justice, even if no one was awake to see it. I slept with the laptop open beside me. The video paused on Emma's frozen smile. Her mouth was mid-laugh, but her eyes had caught the camera. Even in pixels, guilt leaves a shimmer. Morning would bring the next move. Tonight I rested inside the small victory of naming what they did, and knowing that for the first time in years, the story was no longer being told by them. I woke before dawn, the kind of hour that confuses the body. The room was still dark, but I could tell the world outside was turning blue. A faint hum came from the heater, a stubborn sound like something refusing to give up. My hands were cold. I pressed them against the warmth of my chest and waited for my heart to match the rhythm of the room. The laptop still glowed faintly on the table, frozen on Emma's laughing face. Her mouth curved into the kind of smile people wear when they think cruelty is clever. I closed the lid slowly, not out of mercy but control. There was power in deciding when the image ended. I showered and dressed in the same clothes. They smelled faintly of old rain and detergent, but they were mine. I braided my hair back, looked at myself in the mirror, and realized I no longer looked fragile. The lines on my face had sharpened into purpose. I wasn't waiting for rescue anymore. I was preparing for truth. When the clock hit 7, I called Iris. She answered with a steady voice, already awake. Did you sleep? She asked. I rested, I said. That's enough. I'll send a courier for the video card. We'll make certified copies today. After that, no one touches the original until court. Good. There's more, she said. Luke's lawyer tried to contact me last night. They know we filed. What did they say? That they want to talk privately before the hearing. Which means they're afraid. I smiled at that word. Afraid. I let it linger in the air like perfume. Let them be, I said. Fear teaches faster than reason. After the call, I sat by the window. Outside, fog rolled over the parking lot like spilled milk. The world looked half erased, which somehow suited the story. I opened the notepad and began to write again. But this time it wasn't a report. It was a letter to myself. You are not the mother they imagine. You are not the ghost they built from convenience. You are the woman who built tables strong enough to outlive her name. Keep building. The act of writing steadied me more than coffee ever could. I tore the page free and tucked it inside the cedar box. A knock startled me. I opened the door to find a courier holding a padded envelope. Delivery for Ms. Malone, he said, handing me a clipboard. His eyes flicked to the number on the door, then back to me. You're the one from the news, right? The mother suing her son? I paused, caught off guard. Already? He shrugged. Small town. News runs faster than buses. I signed the paper. Then yes, I said. That's me. He nodded once, almost respectfully, and left. Inside the envelope was a copy of the court filing Iris had submitted. Official, stamped, coldly beautiful. The heading read, Petition for Restoration of Ownership and Recognition of Neglect. I ran my finger across the embossed seal. For the first time in months, my name wasn't an afterthought. It was printed in bold. I tucked the papers away, dressed in my heavier coat, and walked out into the morning. Frost glazed the grass, crunching underfoot. The air bit at my cheeks, but I welcomed it. The cold reminded me I could still feel. I took the bus toward the city center, where the courthouse stood like an old confession box. I didn't go inside yet. I only wanted to see it, to measure the distance between myself and the place where I would be heard. The marble steps gleamed with ice, but I climbed 2 of them anyway and stood beneath the columns. A man sweeping the steps looked up and said, Careful, ma'am. I will be, I said. From now on. The sound of my voice in that wide space surprised me. It didn't echo, it landed. The building took it in like something long overdue. When I returned to the motel, my phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. You don't have to do this. Let it go. No name, but the rhythm of the sentence gave him away. Luke always texted like that, short, tidy, polite even when he was cruel. I stared at the message for a full minute before deleting it. There was a time I would have answered with apology, maybe explanation. Now silence was enough. Silence could be a blade if held properly. I locked the door and reopened the laptop. The screen blinked to life, the same folder waiting. Oaklight. The still images lined up neatly, faces frozen mid-laughter. I zoomed in on the man with the square watch. The timestamp in the corner read 8:47 p.m. In the reflection of the hallway mirror behind him, I saw something small but undeniable. A sliver of light from another camera mounted high. My old porch security cam. I had forgotten it even existed. Iris had said to look for neighbors' footage. But if the porch cam was still active, the proof might already be mine. The realization hit with a pulse of heat. I logged into the old cloud account. Password. Thomas Oak 1949. The letters shook under my fingers, half prayer, half memory. The page loaded after a few seconds of stubborn spinning. And there it was. Camera 01. Offline 10 days ago. Last saved file. October 31st, 9:02 p.m. My breath caught. I downloaded the video and opened it. The angle faced the porch steps, the door, the street beyond. I watched Luke step outside during the party, still wearing his costume suit, phone to his ear. He spoke to someone, glancing around. Then another man joined him. The same one from the hallway, square watch gleaming. They talked too quietly to hear, but their posture told a story of caution. When Luke handed him a folder, my stomach tightened. The man opened it, checked inside, and nodded once. Luke looked over his shoulder toward the house and said something. Though the audio was faint, one word slipped through the static. Transfer. I froze the frame. My reflection wavered across the glass of the screen. There it was, the first real thread of proof that this wasn't just cruelty, it was theft. I saved the clip twice, sent one copy to Iris, and backed the other onto a flash drive. Then I stood up and looked around the small motel room. The peeling wallpaper, the half-empty teacup, the thin light on the carpet. It felt less like a cell and more like a workshop now. Every nail, every crack, every imperfection was part of something being built. Thomas's words rang clear in my head. Keep building. When night came, I went downstairs for dinner. The clerk nodded at me again, this time longer. On the television behind her, the evening news showed a short segment, just a headline really, local woman files case against family for neglect. The anchor called me a retired artisan. The camera showed a blurry photo of me from years ago at the shop, smiling with sawdust in my hair. I looked alive. I looked exactly like someone who could survive this. Back in my room, I turned off the light and sat on the bed with the cedar box in my lap. The smell of the wood still lingered faintly, mingled with the sweetness of old varnish. I ran my thumb over the carved words inside the lid. Keep building. I am, I whispered. I am. I placed the flash drive beside the letter, closed the box and rested my hands on it. For the first time since the hospital, I felt steady. The lock had changed, yes, but so had I. The story that began with a closed door was starting to open, one careful hinge at a time. Outside, the wind carried the sound of distant bells from the church at the edge of town. Each one landed softly against the windowpane, as if counting the seconds between who I had been and who I was about to become. And in that narrow, silent moment, I realized something I had never dared to think before. They hadn't taken my life away. They had returned me to it. I never liked mornings that arrive without warning. The kind that just appear behind the curtains, cold and bright, asking if you are ready. I wasn't, but I got up anyway. The floorboards creaked. The air smelled faintly of dust and old coffee grounds. On the table sat the cedar box, the flash drive, and Thomas's letter. 3 pieces of my life lined up like witnesses. I touched the letter first. The edges were soft from handling. I had read it so many times I could almost recite it, but one sentence kept haunting me. If they treat you as a burden, you will not need their permission to be free. Permission. That word had always defined my life. Permission to rest, to spend, to exist without apology. Now it sounded smaller than it used to. I folded the letter carefully, slipped it back into the box and whispered, "You planned something, didn't you, Thomas?" The knock came around 8. I opened the door to find Iris standing there, wrapped in her winter coat, her hair pulled into a knot that had already begun to escape. She smiled when she saw me. "You're up. I don't sleep much anymore." "That's how justice begins," she said lightly. Then her eyes caught the flash drive on the table. "Is that what I think it is?" "The porch camera. There's more than I expected." She stepped inside and shut the door behind her. The air between us felt different now, charged, cautious. I handed her the drive, and she turned it over in her fingers as if it were fragile. "I watched it twice," I said. Luke handed a folder to a man outside the house. I heard the word transfer. "It could mean anything, but—" She interrupted gently. "It means something." We sat at the table while she plugged the drive into her laptop. The small machine hummed to life, its fan spinning like a whisper. On the screen appeared the image of my porch, the same steps, the same light, the same evening that had carved itself into my mind. I watched again as Luke appeared, his breath visible in the cold, his movements clipped and businesslike. The man with the square watch accepted the folder, looked inside, nodded once, and left toward a car parked off-screen. "Pause," Iris said. She zoomed in on the man's face. "That's Richard Sloane. You know him." She exhaled through her nose. "He used to work at the registry office downtown. Real estate filings, transfer of ownership, trust accounts. Retired last year." "So that's what they were doing," I said quietly. "Not just locking me out. They were making sure I could never get back in." Iris nodded slowly, eyes on the screen. "If he handled your husband's estate, he could have helped them reroute the trust. But this," she tapped the frame. "This is proof. Visual. He's not supposed to be in possession of those documents outside official premises." My throat tightened. Thomas left protections in the will. But maybe Luke found a way around them. "Or thought he did," she said. "You still hold discretion under the clause. That gives us leverage." She reached for her bag, pulling out a folder thick with papers. "There's more you should see." She laid down copies of the filings from last week, pages dense with language designed to confuse. She pointed to one paragraph halfway down. They filed an addendum claiming you voluntarily relinquished property rights during your surgery recovery. Signed under proxy authority. I stared at her. Proxy? I never signed anything. I know, Iris said. That's why it's illegal. But it's clever. They submitted a false witness statement to validate it. The name is familiar too. She flipped the page. Richard Sloane. He notarized it. My pulse raced. He was part of it. All of it. Yes, she said. And we can prove it now. I leaned back, pressing a hand to my chest where the scar still ached in cold weather. Thomas must have known this could happen. He left me the box at the bank for a reason. Maybe there's more inside, Iris said. I thought about that, the way the letter had felt too brief for a man like Thomas, who never said in one line what could be said in three. I remembered the weight of the safe deposit box when I opened it the first time. It had felt heavier than a single envelope and a letter. Maybe I had been too shaken to notice. I want to go back, I said. To the bank. Now. Now, I repeated. The air outside bit at our faces as we crossed the street. The sun was bright, the kind of sharp winter light that exposes everything. When we entered the bank, the warmth inside hit like a tide. The same young clerk from before looked up. Recognition flickered in his eyes. Good morning, Miss Malone, he said, suddenly formal. Back for your box? Yes. I need to review the contents again. He hesitated, then nodded and gestured toward the private room. Iris followed me inside. The metal drawer slid out with a dull scrape. I opened it, half expecting nothing new. The envelope lay there, the letter inside. But beneath it, pressed against the bottom, was something I hadn't seen before. A smaller wooden container, pale and smooth with a brass clasp. My fingers trembled when I lifted it. The surface bore Thomas's initials burned into the lid. T.M. I hesitated, then unlatched it. Inside were 3 items. An old pocket watch, a folded legal paper, and a small silver key with a tag marked Box 2. Iris leaned forward. He left another box. My heart thudded. Where? She scanned the paper quickly. It's a secondary deposit box under your name, but sealed until a condition is met. That condition, she pointed, is the presentation of this key and proof of abandonment. Abandonment, I whispered. He meant neglect, she said softly. If they ever treated you as a burden, the key becomes active. My throat went dry. Thomas hadn't just predicted betrayal. He had built a safeguard into the bones of it. He knew, I said. He knew they'd do this. Iris smiled, not in triumph but respect. He must have loved you deeply. Most people write wills. He wrote a strategy. She gathered the documents. We'll access Box 2 this afternoon. If my guess is right, it contains the original trust deed and property titles. Maybe even something that redefines the entire case. I held the key up to the light. It gleamed faintly, a simple thing, ordinary and divine at once. He always said love is the only thing that needs proof less than wood, I murmured. But he left me both anyway. We signed the forms, the clerk processed them, and the box was sealed again. As we stepped back into the street, snow began to fall, slow flakes that caught the light like tiny fragments of forgiveness. Iris turned to me. Cora, are you ready for what comes next? I looked at her, then at the key in my palm. I was ready the moment they locked the door. The vault attendant checked the forms twice, then led us down a corridor that smelled faintly of lemon and metal. The door at the end was thick, the kind that made sound smaller. He turned a wheel with both hands and stepped aside for us to enter the small viewing room. A table. 2 chairs. The silence of decisions. He returned with the steel drawer marked under my name and set it gently on the felt. When he left, the room felt like a held breath. I placed Thomas's little brass key on the table and looked at Iris. She gave a single nod that felt like a green light. The key slid into the second lock with a soft acceptance. The drawer opened. Inside was another wooden box, darker than the first, the grain tight and patient. I recognized the way Thomas finished corners, the way he softened edges so a hand would feel welcomed. On the lid, burned into the wood, were 3 words in his careful script. For proof later. My fingers shook as I lifted the lid. On top lay a folded document with a ribbon through its spine. Beneath it, a small digital voice recorder wrapped in cloth. Under that, a thick envelope stamped with a seal I did not recognize. I looked at Iris. She was already reading the first page with the concentration of a surgeon. Her eyes moved left to right, then back again as if confirming a miracle. "Cora," she said slowly, "this is a trust restatement signed 14 years ago. It reiterates your full discretion and adds a trigger clause that removes any heir who demonstrates neglect or financial coercion." She tapped the margin. "And here, there is a successor trustee named to assume control the moment you invoke the clause." "Who is it?" I asked, though some part of me already knew. She lifted the page so I could see. "Successor trustee Iris Caldwell." The signature line bore my husband's name and a date I recognized as the summer Iris sanded a walnut chair until it shone like patience. "Thomas," I whispered, half prayer, half rebuke, "you kept so much." Iris exhaled. "He came to see me then with a draft. I was 19. He asked me what I believed about fairness. I told him fairness was just the way Wood likes to be treated. He smiled and said that would do." She brushed a thumb along the edge of the paper. "I did not know he finished it. I did not know he named me." Emotion rose quick and warm, like steam when cold air meets a kettle. "He trusted you," I said, "before I knew to." Iris set the document aside with reverence. "Let us hear the recorder." The device was old, buttons shiny from use. I pressed play. Static opened first, then Thomas's voice filled the room. It was not the voice of memory. It was present, warm, a little rough from a lifetime of trying to hold gentleness steady in a noisy world. "My Cora," he began, as if talking to me across a kitchen table. "If this is later, then I hope it is a later we have prepared for and not a later full of regret. I have left you tools. You never needed instructions, but I know that sometimes a map saves time." He paused, the sound of a page turning close to the microphone. "You and I built things meant to last. We also built a son. He is loved. He is also his own weather. If the day comes when our boy forgets who taught him how to set a straight line, you must not let that crooked path take the house with it. I have placed language in the trust that gives you complete discretion at the first sign of neglect or abandonment. Do not doubt yourself. 2 people will stand beside you. Eloise, because she knows our lives without needing a ledger, and a young woman named Iris Caldwell. I met her at your shop. She works like Wood understands her hands. She will be your second in the law the moment you call it." The room felt smaller, as if his voice had reached out and pulled the walls closer so we could hear each other better. Thomas continued, his tone changing firmer. "There is a man at the registry who is clever with paper. His name is Richard Sloane. He helped me once with a boundary deed and asked too many questions about what would happen when I was gone. I do not trust men who count futures that are not theirs. If he appears near our affairs, treat it as a poor omen." Iris and I looked at each other. The recorder had named the ghost in the doorway years before he walked through it. "And finally," Thomas said, the voice softening again, "remember that mercy is not weakness. It is a choice you get to make on your own terms. But do not let mercy be a mask they ask you to wear while they take from you." I have enclosed original certified copies of the deed, the title to the adjoining rental, and the papers for the land up in Ashfield. There is also a letter addressed to the county judge. He is a good man who buys bread from the bakery under Iris's office every Friday. If you need it, give it to him with this recording. It will remind him that law and neighborliness are not enemies. The recorder clicked as if he set it down beside his coffee. A long breath. Then, softer than anything else, "Keep building, my love. If the house forgets you, then let the world remember." The recording ended. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of a man who had planned a kindness strong enough to survive absence. I wiped my eyes with the heel of my hand. Iris sat very still. After a moment she reached into the box and lifted the thick envelope with the unfamiliar seal. She broke it carefully and slid out a sheaf of papers. "These are originals," she said, all plain in her voice. "Certified copies of the property titles, the trust restatement with court stamps, and a sealed letter with the judge's name. He was a junior clerk then. He is a judge now." Thomas gave him a gift and a warning in equal measure. She held up another document. "Look at this. It is a memorandum of conversations Thomas had with Sloane. He recorded dates, questions asked, And a notation here that Sloan inquired about medical proxies that would allow someone else to sign for you. Thomas writes, and I quote, "If this comes up, it is not for your good. It is a tool for someone else's impatience." My hands went cold despite the warm room. Luke. The addendum filed last week. The proxy I had never granted. The line from the porch camera. Transfer. Iris placed the documents back in order. We have more than enough to ask for immediate relief and sanctions. The court will not like any part of this. The fact that Thomas anticipated this pattern makes our claim not just strong but inevitable. We packed the contents slowly, careful as if returning fragile heirlooms to safety after a storm. Before we closed the box, I pressed my fingertips to the carved words inside the lid. For proof later. He had believed there would be a later worth defending. When the attendant returned to escort us out, he saw something in our faces that kept him gentle. He did not ask. He did not need to. Outside, the snow had thickened into steady white, softening the edges of the street. People moved slower. The world had decided to stop rushing. We stood under the bank awning while Iris called her office to prepare emergency filings. Her voice was precise, each instruction like a chiseled notch. When she hung up, she looked at me and smiled in a way I had not seen since she was a student. The grin of someone who recognizes the grain of justice and knows it will take a finish. "We go straight to court," she said. "We request temporary control, a no-contact order, and a freeze on all transfers. We submit the recording as a proffer with the letter to the judge. We name Sloan and ask for an inquiry." "I will do what you say," I answered. "All of it." As we walked, I thought about mercy and masks. I thought about the moment on the porch when the light went out and how that was the last time I would let someone else control the switch. I thought about the small key in my pocket and the larger key that had just turned inside me. We passed the bakery. The bell on the door rang as someone left with a loaf. Warm air spilled into the cold and carried a whisper of cinnamon onto the street. I wanted to step inside and tell the bakers they were in a story now, that their hands and their dough were somehow holding up the same sky that covered a courtroom. Instead, I kept walking. Some gratitude belongs to the world quietly. At the courthouse, Iris guided me through security and up a flight of marble stairs that had been held by generations of hands. We waited in a narrow hallway that smelled of wool coats in winter. A clerk approached, took our papers, and told us the judge would see us in chambers in 20 minutes. 20 minutes. The rest of my life measured in less time than I used to take to finish a table leg. Iris rested a hand lightly on my shoulder. "Breathe," she said. "Not like a patient. Like a builder. In and out. Trust the body you have. It has work to do." I breathed. The scar along my chest tugged and then settled. The ache did not leave. "Join me." When the door opened, the judge sat behind a plain desk, his robe draped over the back of his chair like a promise he did not need to wear to be true. He looked up and saw my name on the filing, then saw me, and something like recognition moved behind his eyes. Iris handed him the letter from Thomas and the recorder. He read in silence, then nodded once, a gesture that said a man from long ago had kept faith with his future. He listened to Iris lay out the facts without adjective or ornament. She spoke of locks and proxies, of transfers and a party where laughter did not know its own weight. She spoke of an old clerk with a square watch and a habit of passing envelopes in the cold. She pressed pause in her sentences where Thomas's voice fit, then let the judge hear it. When she finished, he turned to me. "Ms. Malone, is this your will in the everyday sense, not the legal one? Is this what you want?" I did not look at Iris. I did not look at the recorder. I looked at the judge and said, "It is what I am choosing." He nodded as if the grammar pleased him. He signed a temporary order granting me immediate control of the properties and accounts named in the trust. He signed another order preventing Luke and Emma from contacting me or accessing any documents related to my estate. He signed a third instructing the clerk to open an inquiry into the filings notarized by Richard Sloan. When the last pen stroke dried, the air in the room felt different. Not lighter. Right-sized. Back in the hallway, Iris squeezed my hand. "This is the first door," she said. "There will be others. We will open them in order." We stepped out into the afternoon. The snow had stopped. The sun came through a gap in the clouds, turning the courthouse steps into something gentle. I lifted my face to it and closed my eyes. Warmth found the places cold had been keeping. On the sidewalk, I took the cedar box from my bag and opened it just enough to see the words one more time. Keep building. I smiled and tucked it away. The lock had changed. The story had not. It had always been about a door and a woman deciding who she would be on the other side. I was ready for the next hinge. The courthouse smelled of old paper and wet wool. The floor tiles were slick from snow tracked in by the crowd. I stood near the window watching my breath fog the glass, my hands clasped to stop them from trembling. The storm outside had quieted overnight, leaving a white stillness that felt ceremonial. Today the silence had weight. Iris stood beside me reviewing notes, her hair escaping the neat bun she had tied hours earlier. You don't have to speak much, she said. Your testimony is already in your statement. But when the judge asks, tell the truth as if you were carving it from wood. Steady, patient, one stroke at a time. I know, I said, though my throat felt raw. It's not fear, Iris. It's recognition. I've been waiting to be heard for too long. She gave a small smile. Then today they will hear you. The bailiff opened the door. Case number 1423. Malone versus Malone. The echo of it rolled down the hallway like thunder that had been waiting for the right hill to strike. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than I imagined. The wood benches gleamed with polish. The air faintly smelled of polish and nerves. Luke and Emma sat at the defense table, hands folded in synchronized composure. Luke looked older, his jaw tighter. Emma wore a navy suit, her hair in a bun so tight it looked painful. Neither of them met my eyes. The judge, the same man Thomas had once mentioned in his recording, adjusted his glasses and began with the formalities. His tone was calm, professional, but there was a thread of recognition when he read the letter Thomas had left. He folded it once, carefully, and placed it beside his notepad as if it were a relic deserving care. Iris rose first. Her voice carried clarity instead of volume. She began with the timeline. My hospitalization, the changed locks, the video, the false filings notarized by Richard Sloan. Each date clicked into place like parts of a mechanism finally aligned. When she played the footage from Halloween, the courtroom shifted. Laughter filled the speakers and then silence, the kind that cuts air in half. I did not look at Luke. I looked at the judge because that was where the truth was now meant to land. The sound of Emma's imitation filled the room, her faltering, cruel mimicry of my weakness, and then the deeper voice came through, crisp and cold. Turn that off. She will find out. Iris paused the video and turned toward the bench. That voice belongs to Richard Sloan. At the time, Mr. Sloan was a registered notary for the state and an employee of the county registrar. This audio and the attached metadata confirm his presence in the Malone residence, engaging in private transactions with the defendants. These actions coincide with an attempt to transfer trust assets under a falsified proxy authority. The judge leaned forward, brows furrowing. And the proof of that authority? Iris held up the addendum filed by Luke's lawyer. Here, Your Honor. Signed and notarized by Mr. Sloan. We have matching witness logs from the registry's visitor records that show he met with the defendants that same week. She set down another document, the restated trust from Thomas's second box. And this, she said, predates any fraudulent modification. It restores full control to Mrs. Malone under the condition of neglect. Signed, sealed, and witnessed by the late Thomas Malone, and notarized by this court's own clerk 14 years ago. The room exhaled. Papers rustled. Someone coughed. Even Luke's lawyer, a man with the kind of expensive confidence that usually survives anything, looked uncertain for the first time. Then it was my turn. The clerk called me to the stand. I walked slowly, each step deliberate. The oath felt ceremonial but necessary. I promised to tell the truth and sat down, hands folded in my lap. Iris began softly. Mrs. Malone, when did you realize your key no longer fit your home? The morning after I was released from surgery, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. The rain hadn't stopped since the night before. I tried the lock 3 times. Each time it turned me away. That's when I knew the house had learned to forget me. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge raised a hand, quieting it. Did your son or daughter-in-law ever communicate with you after that day? No. I called. No one answered. The only sound I heard from that house again was laughter on a recording. Iris nodded. And what did you feel when you heard that recording? I thought for a moment. Relieved. Because cruelty recorded is still evidence. It can't pretend to be love anymore. The room went still. Then the defense rose. Their lawyer, a man named Harlan Finch, walked forward with careful, almost courteous steps. Mrs. Malone, do you believe your son ever intended you harm? I believe he intended himself convenience, I said. Perhaps he thought he was protecting you, he pressed. Ensuring you were cared for properly. If protection means being erased, I replied, then yes, he protected me thoroughly. Finch hesitated. You're a mother, Mrs. Malone. Surely you can understand the pressures of maintaining family property, the responsibilities. I am a mother, I interrupted. Which is why I understand betrayal differently. It doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the hands you taught to hold. A whisper of sound passed through the audience. Someone gasped, someone sighed. The judge's gavel came down lightly. Order. But his eyes never left mine. Finch straightened his papers, already retreating. No further questions. When I stepped down, Iris placed a steady hand on my shoulder. Perfect, she whispered. You gave them truth without ornament. The rest of the hearing unfolded in waves of procedure. Sloan, now subpoenaed, failed to appear. His lawyer submitted a statement citing illness. The judge frowned but continued. He reviewed every page, every signature. He replayed the recording twice, listening closely each time the voice said transfer. By late afternoon, the light in the room had changed. The snow outside glowed gold in the sinking sun. The judge removed his glasses, rubbed his eyes, and began to speak. I have seen families fracture for less, he said, his voice even. But the law does not arbitrate emotion. It recognizes proof. What I have before me is a pattern of neglect and misrepresentation, confirmed by visual and documentary evidence. Mrs. Malone, your husband's provisions were thorough. He left the law with clear instructions, and the court will honor them. He looked directly at Luke and Emma. The trust and all associated properties revert immediately to the plaintiff. The defendants are to vacate the premises within 10 days. Any continued interference will result in criminal proceedings. The words settled slowly like snowfall. I heard a soft intake of breath from Emma. A single exhale from Luke that sounded like defeat disguised as disbelief. I did not look at them. The gavel struck once. Case adjourned. The sound carried through the wooden walls and out into the cold corridors of the courthouse. People began to move, their voices rising again. Iris gathered the papers with her practiced precision. She turned to me, smiling with something between pride and relief. It's done. No, I said quietly. It started. We walked outside together. The afternoon had deepened into blue light, the sky wide and forgiving. The courthouse steps were slick with half-melted snow. I paused halfway down, looking up at the flag stirring in the wind. He would have liked this, I said. Thomas? Iris asked. Yes. He believed in wood and in justice. Both take patience, both endure storms. She laughed softly. And both need sanding before they shine. I smiled. Exactly. We reached the street where the crowd had thinned. Across the road, a small boy was building something in the snow walls, towers, small bridges between them. His mother called, but he kept working. Each piece found its place. That night I returned to the motel one last time. I sat at the small desk, opened the cedar box, and placed the court-stamped order inside. The letter from Thomas lay beneath it, the silver key on top. I whispered to the empty room. We built it, love. It stands. Outside, the sky stretched black and endless. I opened the window, letting in the cold. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell marked the hour. The sound was steady, unhurried, exact. I thought of Luke, of Emma, of how easily love can turn into possession and how possession always rots. I did not wish them harm. I wished them awareness, that quiet punishment that never ends but teaches. Then I blew out the lamp. The room fell into darkness, but it was not empty. It felt like the pause between movements of a song you've known all your life. The stillness before the next note begins. Tomorrow I would begin again, not as someone waiting for permission, but as a woman who had walked through the fire and come out carrying the blueprints of her own survival. The world outside my window was silent except for the soft hush of wind against glass. I lay back and let that sound fill the space where fear used to live. For the first time since the lock turned against me, I slept without dreaming of closed doors. The snow had melted by the time the papers cleared. What was left of winter clung to the edges of the fields, thin patches of white like forgotten pages. I moved back into the house that used to be mine, though it no longer felt like a home. The air inside carried a different silence, one that belonged to rooms that had been used by strangers. I walked through each hallway slowly, touching walls, tracing the grain of the wooden banister Thomas carved himself. The place was immaculate. Emma had always liked perfection. She must have scrubbed away every trace of me. But wood remembers what polish forgets. Under the gleam, there were still faint scratches from the day Luke dragged his toy car across the railing. I followed that line with my finger and whispered, "You were small once. You still fit in my arms." Upstairs, the bedroom smelled of detergent and lavender. The curtains were new, too pale, too formal. I opened the window and let the wind rush in. It carried the scent of pine and wet soil. That was the smell of truth. I wanted the house to breathe it again. In the attic, I found a box of my old tools: chisels, mallets, sandpaper dulled from years of use. I ran my hand over them, feeling the stories in the steel. The handles were worn where my fingers used to rest. Craft is memory disguised as motion. I thought of Thomas, of the shop we once built from nothing but faith and oak dust. When Iris visited that week, she found me sitting cross-legged on the floor with a plank of wood balanced across my knees. She didn't speak at first, just watched. "I'm not building furniture," I said before she could ask. "I'm building something else." She smiled. "A life. Maybe a promise." She handed me a newspaper folded under her arm. On the second page was an article, "Mother Wins Landmark Case on Elder Neglect. The Malone Verdict Sets Precedent." There was a small photo of me outside the courthouse, snow falling, my face turned toward the light. The headline made me uneasy, but the caption beneath it was worse. "Cora Malone, the woman who locked the lock." "They think it's about revenge," I said. "They always do," Iris replied. "But you and I know it's about rebuilding." The idea came to me that evening while sanding a piece of cedar near the fireplace. The motion calmed me. Back and forth, each stroke gathering rhythm until the surface caught light evenly. I thought of all the women I'd met at the clinic, at the church, even in the pharmacy. Women with tired eyes who whispered too quietly about sons and husbands in houses that no longer felt safe. I imagined a place for them. A workshop. A small foundation that taught more than survival, craft, independence, ownership. A house that could not be taken away. Iris loved the idea immediately. "You could use part of the property," she said. "The trust gives you full discretion. We'll form a non-profit under your name. You choose the mission. I'll draft the papers." I wrote the name that night in my notebook. Hearthlight Haven. Felt right. Hearth for warmth, light for courage, haven for what every woman deserves. By spring, the first volunteers arrived. Eloise from next door brought fresh bread and stories. June, a retired librarian, helped organize donations of books and sewing supplies. Then came Layla, a young woman of 19 who had run from a marriage older than herself. She spoke little, but her hands were steady. I taught her how to sand without pressing too hard. "Let the wood tell you when it's ready," I said. She nodded, eyes focused on the grain. "It's quieter than people," she murmured. We built benches for the garden, picture frames for the local shelter, and small boxes for the courthouse gift shop. The local newspaper returned for another story, this time titled "From Lawsuit to Lighthouse, the Hearthlight Project." They asked if I had forgiven my son. I told them forgiveness was not a door someone else could open for you. It's a window you decide to look through when you're ready. Luke never called. Emma sent one letter, short, brittle, written in the voice of someone who still believed words could outmaneuver guilt. I read it once and placed it in the fire. Some things need to disappear to make space for what must stay. Every morning the house filled with the hum of life again. The women worked, laughed, sometimes cried quietly over tea. Each had a story. Each was carving herself back into the world. I spent hours in the workshop, sanding new beginnings from old timber. Sometimes, when the sunlight slanted across the dust, I could almost see Thomas standing at the far end of the room, smiling his quiet smile. He had built this without living to see it. His blueprint was love disguised as foresight. Iris came often, though her work at the firm had doubled since the case made headlines. She liked to sit by the window and watch the women in the garden. "It's growing faster than we expected," she said one afternoon. "We'll need more space soon." "I'll give it," I said simply. "There's an unused barn at the back of the property. We'll clean it up." By summer, the barn had become a training hall. Long work tables lined the walls, each marked with initials carved into their corners. Layla's bench had tiny stars etched beside her name. Eloise's was covered in pressed flowers under clear resin. Mine simply read K.M. with a small knot of wood left untouched because perfection never interested me. At night, after everyone had gone home, I would walk through the quiet hall and run my hand along each bench. The wood felt alive, humming with small histories. I knew the house that once exiled me had finally turned into something else. A living testament that pain can be repurposed into purpose. Sometimes I still dreamed of Luke, of a small boy holding a wooden plane, shaving curls of pine from a block while Thomas guided his hand. In the dream, Luke always looked up at me and said, "Is it good enough, Mom?" And I always answered, "Yes, it's good enough." When I woke, I wondered if that dream was memory or forgiveness trying to learn my language. In autumn, the foundation received its first grant from the city. The check arrived with a handwritten note from the judge. For proof later. I smiled at the echo of Thomas's words. Iris laughed when she saw it. "Looks like your husband is still giving orders through other people." We celebrated quietly that night. The women cooked stew, bread, and tea. The air smelled of time and gratitude. I stood by the fireplace and told them about the phrase Thomas used to say whenever the world felt too large. "Keep building." "Maybe that's what we're doing here," I said. "Not rebuilding. Just continuing what was never meant to stop." Layla raised her cup. "To the ones who keep building," she said. The sound of their voices rose together, filling the room like light. After dinner, when the laughter softened and the others drifted home, I stepped outside. The air was cool, the moon bright enough to silver the fields. The house stood behind me, every window glowing warm. For the first time in years, it looked alive not because of what it contained, but because of what it gave away. I thought about the beginning, the rain, the locked door, the porch light that went out, and realized it wasn't the end of anything. It was just the sound of construction starting underground, where foundations are laid in silence. As I walked back inside, I paused by the door and touched the lock, the same one that had once turned me away. It clicked open easily, as if time itself had oiled the mechanism. I smiled. "Good," I whispered. "You learned." I closed the door behind me, not to shut the world out, but to keep the warmth in. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the windows, painting gold across the walls. The smell of bread drifted from the kitchen, and the workshop hummed with life. I tied my apron, picked up a piece of wood, and began to carve. Each stroke was quiet, deliberate, like breathing. The world outside might still be cruel, but inside these walls, kindness was busy at work. Solid, tangible, and built to last. And as the first visitors of the day arrived, women who looked both tired and brave, I welcomed them the same way Thomas used to welcome me at the workshop door. "Come in," I said. "We're still building." The first frost of the new winter came quietly, threading silver through the fields like a secret returning home. I woke before dawn, as I often did, and stood by the window. The garden below shimmered under a thin sheet of ice. In the dim light, the benches gleamed like sculptures waiting for morning to finish them. It had been almost a year since the verdict, nearly 12 months since I'd turned a courtroom into the first plank of a new foundation. The town had changed in small, kind ways. People who once whispered now waved from their porches. The bakery below the courthouse started leaving loaves on my doorstep every Friday. The judge visited once with his wife and stayed for tea among the cedar shavings. Even the wind seemed softer when it moved through the eaves. But most of all, I had changed. I no longer counted days by survival but by creation. I had learned that healing was not a return to who you were. It was the slow, patient building of someone new, from the same material just carved differently. The workshop came alive behind me. Layla was already setting out tools. Eloise hummed a hymn while she arranged ribbons. The sound of sanding and laughter drifted through the air, blending with the smell of pine. When I walked in, Layla looked up and smiled. "We've finished the sign," she said. I raised a brow. "Already? It took 3 of us," she said proudly. "You'll want to see it." The women led me outside to the front gate. There, hanging from iron hooks, was a wide cedar board engraved in deep, clean letters. "The Malone House, a haven for rebuilding." The grain caught the sunlight perfectly. Every letter looked alive. I stared at it, unable to speak for a moment. "You kept the name." Eloise nodded. "Because it's not his anymore. Or theirs. It's yours. And now it belongs to everyone who walks through that door." I touched the letters, feeling the grooves under my fingertips. "He would have liked this," I said softly. Layla smiled. "You taught us to carve straight lines from broken wood. This place just learned from you." The official reopening was scheduled for that weekend. The mayor promised to attend, along with local artisans, the women from town, and a handful of journalists who wanted to write about the woman who turned a trial into a temple. The phrase embarrassed me, but Iris insisted. "Let them call it whatever they want," she said. "You earned every syllable." She arrived that morning wearing a red scarf and holding 2 coffees. "We're on the front page again," she said, handing me one. "But this time they spelled your name right." I laughed. Progress. We walked through the workshop together, inspecting each display. Benches, jewelry boxes, carved frames, hand-painted signs. Every piece was made by the women who had once come here afraid to start again. Now they sold what their hands created. The proceeds went back into the program, funding new tools, classes, and hope. Iris stopped at one of the benches and brushed her fingers along its surface. "You realize this is bigger than a workshop now," she said. "It's becoming a way of living. People come here and remember that pain can be repurposed." I nodded. "That's the only kind of architecture that lasts." She smiled. "Thomas would have said the same thing." At noon the guests began to arrive. The courtyard filled with sound, children running, women greeting one another. The rustle of paper programs printed with the hearthlight symbol. I stood at the front steps with Iris beside me. When the mayor finished her speech, the microphone was passed to me. I looked out over the faces, some familiar, some new, all waiting. For a moment I felt that same quiet I had felt in court. The stillness before the truth finds its way into air. "Most of you know a piece of my story," I began. "But stories are not meant to end in courtrooms. They're meant to keep moving until they become places where others can rest." A hush fell. Even the children grew quiet. When I first came back to this house, I was afraid of what I'd find. I thought I'd hear echoes of betrayal in every hallway. But I didn't. I heard something else. I heard the sound of wood breathing again, of rooms asking to be filled with laughter instead of silence. And I realized something: survival is not enough. We must build something out of it. I gestured toward the women behind me. These women built this place. With their hands, their stories, and their courage. What stands here now is not a monument to what was lost. It's a blueprint for what can begin again. The applause rose, gentle at first, then stronger. I saw Layla wiping tears from her face. Eloise held her hands clasped as if in prayer. I continued, my voice steady. The Malone House is open to anyone who has been told they are too small to stay standing. Here we build not just with wood, but with memory, mercy, and will. Because sometimes the most beautiful things are made from what was once broken. The crowd clapped again. The mayor unveiled the new sign. Cameras flashed, and for a moment the courtyard glittered with reflected light. But the only thing I felt was warmth, real, human, ordinary warmth. After the ceremony, Iris found me by the garden. "You handled that beautifully," she said. "You even made the mayor cry." I laughed. "That wasn't my intention." "Still," Iris said, "not a bad day's work." We watched as the crowd began to drift away, carrying pieces they bought from the shop. One woman stopped to hug Layla. Another promised to send her sister to join next season's class. The house hummed with life again. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I walked through the empty workshop. The last of the sunlight poured across the benches, turning the dust in the air into gold. I sat at my old table and opened the cedar box one final time. Inside were Thomas's letter, the key, the court order, and the new newspaper clipping. I added one more thing. A small handwritten note. "If you ever find this, know that I was not rebuilding from ruins. I was finishing what love began." I closed the lid, locked it, and placed it on the shelf beside the others, the women's boxes, each one marked with initials and dates. This was my legacy now. Not a fortune, not forgiveness, but continuity. Outside, the first snowflakes began to fall again, soft and slow. The lights from the windows cast long amber shapes across the ground. I stepped outside and tilted my face toward the sky. The air was cold, sharp, perfect. In the distance, I heard the church bells. They no longer sounded like endings. They sounded like tools, a rhythm to work by, a heartbeat reminding me that creation never stops. It only changes form. When I went back inside, Layla's half-finished sculpture caught my eye. It was a small figure, a woman kneeling beside a growing tree. The grain of the wood made the folds of her dress shimmer in the light. I touched its surface gently. "She's beautiful," I whispered. I left the lamp burning that night, the golden light spilling across the work tables. Tomorrow would bring new women, new stories, new wood to carve. That was the promise Thomas had left me, the one I now passed forward without needing words. The last thing I wrote in my notebook before sleeping was simple: keep building. Always. And as I drifted off, the sound of the wind through the trees outside became indistinguishable from the rhythm of my own breathing. The lock had changed. The door had opened. And this time it was staying open for good.